My name is Isabella Foster. I'm 29 years old, and I just watched my sister Megan walk down the aisle wearing the custom wedding dress I had spent 6 months hand-sewing with intricate beadwork and French lace embroidery after she broke into my apartment and stole it from my closet 3 days before her ceremony. What made the theft even more devastating was watching my mother Carol insist that I should be happy for your sister and not ruin her special moment with accusations, while the entire wedding party sat in silence, knowing they were witnessing a bride wearing a stolen creation that belonged to her sister. I've spent the last 8 years building a successful fashion design business in Los Angeles, specializing in custom bridal gowns and formal wear for clients who want something truly unique and personal. My atelier employs 12 seamstresses and pattern makers, and we've dressed celebrities, socialites, and discerning brides who understand that a custom gown is not just clothing. It's wearable art that represents months of creative vision, technical expertise, and meticulous craftsmanship. The dress that Megan stole wasn't just any gown in my collection. It was my personal masterpiece, the wedding dress I had designed for my own future ceremony. I had spent countless evenings after work, hand-beating delicate floral patterns across the bodice, sourcing vintage French lace from estate sales, and creating custom embroidery that told the story of my relationship with my fiancé David through symbolic motifs that had meaning only to us. Every detail of the dress had been planned with obsessive care. The silk charmeuse had been imported from a family mill in Lyon that had been producing luxury fabrics for 5 generations. The beadwork incorporated pearls that had belonged to my grandmother, arranged in patterns that referenced the lace on her own wedding veil. The embroidery included tiny forget-me-nots in thread that matched David's eyes, and hidden beneath the train were our initials worked in silver thread that would only be visible to me as I walked down the aisle. The dress represented not just my skills as a designer, but my dreams as a bride. It was the culmination of everything I had learned about couture construction, fabric manipulation, and the emotional power of clothing to transform significant moments in a woman's life. I had poured my heart into every stitch, treating it as both a personal project and a professional showcase of my abilities at the highest level of fashion design. But my relationship with my sister had always been complicated by her sense of entitlement to my creative work and professional achievements. Megan had built her career as a lifestyle influencer around the premise that style and beauty should be accessible and effortless, often appropriating my designs and techniques without acknowledging the hours of work and years of training that made them possible. The pattern had started in high school, when Megan would borrow outfits I had designed and sewn for special occasions, wearing them to her own events and posting photos that made it appear as though she had created or chosen the looks herself. By the time we were both adults, she had developed a sense of ownership over my creative output that our mother not only enabled, but actively encouraged. "Isabella has such a gift for making beautiful things," Carol would say when Megan helped herself to items from my studio or wardrobe. "She should be happy to share her talents with family. That's what sisters do for each other." The expectation that I should provide free custom fashion for Megan's social media content had become so normalized in our family that objecting to it was treated as selfish and ungenerous. Have you ever had someone treat your professional skills and creative work as a free resource they could access whenever they needed something special? That's exactly what I experienced for years as Megan treated my fashion design business like her personal styling service, taking whatever she wanted while building her own brand around the aesthetics I had created. The theft of my wedding dress represented the ultimate violation of this pattern, crossing the line from appropriating my general creative work to stealing the most personal and meaningful garment I had ever created. But what made it even more devastating was discovering that my entire family had known about the theft and had chosen to protect Megan's wedding day, rather than my property rights or emotional well-being. The morning of Megan's wedding, I had gone to my studio to make final adjustments to a bridesmaid dress when I noticed that the garment bag containing my wedding gown was missing from the locked closet where I stored my most precious pieces. Security footage from my building would later reveal that Megan had used the spare key I had given her for emergencies to enter my apartment at 2 a.m., specifically targeting the dress she knew I treasured above all others. But in that moment, standing in my studio staring at the empty space where my dress should have been, I felt a level of betrayal that went beyond simple theft. Megan hadn't just stolen a garment. She had stolen months of my creative energy, my professional expertise, and the physical embodiment of my dreams for my own wedding day. She had taken something irreplaceable and was planning to wear it as though it belonged to her. The devastating realization that my sister was wearing my stolen wedding dress while my family demanded that I remain silent about the theft was about to become the catalyst for exposing years of creative exploitation and teaching everyone involved that some violations are too profound to be covered up by demands for family peace. The history of Megan's appropriation of my creative work stretched back over a decade, but it had escalated dramatically once she began building her social media presence around lifestyle content that featured fashion, beauty, and effortless style. What her followers didn't know was that her seemingly natural fashion sense was actually the result of systematic theft from my design studio and wardrobe. Throughout college, Megan had regularly raided my closet for pieces to wear to sorority events, date nights, and spring break trips that she would document extensively on Instagram. She would carefully crop photos to hide identifying details of my custom pieces while positioning herself as someone with innate style, rather than someone who was borrowing from a fashion designer sister. Megan has such a natural eye for fashion, our mother would brag to friends and relatives. She just knows how to put together looks that are stylish and current. Isabella is talented at making clothes, but Megan understands how to wear them. The comparison always stung because it dismissed my formal training and professional achievements while elevating Megan's ability to appropriate my work as evidence of superior fashion intelligence. After graduation, when I moved to Los Angeles to launch my design business, I had hoped that geographic distance would create natural boundaries around my creative work, but Megan began making regular visits to my studio under the guise of sisterly bonding, each time leaving with borrowed accessories, samples, or prototypes that would appear in her social media content within days. The borrowing always followed the same pattern. Megan would admire something in my studio, ask to borrow it for a specific event or photo shoot, promise to return it promptly, and then either keep the item indefinitely or return it damaged in ways that made it unwearable. When I tried to establish boundaries around my work, our mother would intervene with lectures about family generosity and the importance of supporting each other's careers. "Isabella, you have so many beautiful things," Carol would say when I complained about Megan's constant appropriation. "You can afford to share with your sister. She's building her brand, and your clothes help her create content that could benefit both of you. You should be proud that she wants to feature your designs." The reframing of theft as collaboration was particularly manipulative because it made my objections seem petty and ungenerous. Carol consistently portrayed Megan's appropriation as a form of flattery that I should appreciate rather than theft that I should resist. But the appropriation went beyond just borrowing finished pieces. Megan began copying my design techniques, color palettes, and styling approaches for her own content creation, often posting tutorials that presented my professional methods as her own discoveries. She would watch me work during studio visits, then create simplified versions of my techniques for her YouTube channel without crediting the source of her knowledge. DIY Designer Looks for Less became one of Megan's most popular content series, featuring tutorials where she recreated simplified versions of high-end fashion using techniques she had observed in my studio. Her audience believed they were learning from someone with natural fashion instincts, when they were actually receiving watered-down versions of professional couture methods that had taken me years to master. The financial impact of Megan's appropriation became more apparent as her influence grew. Potential clients would sometimes mention seeing similar designs on her social media, not realizing they were looking at stolen or copied versions of my original work. Brand partnerships that might have come to me as a professional designer were instead going to Megan as an influencer who appeared to have access to high-end fashion and design expertise. "Your sister is really making a name for herself in the fashion space," colleagues would mention at industry events, unaware that Megan's fashion credibility was built on systematic theft from my professional work. The irony of losing business opportunities to someone who was stealing from me was almost too painful to acknowledge. Have you ever watched someone build their career and reputation by taking credit for your work, while your family celebrated their success and criticized you for not being more supportive? That's exactly what I experienced as Megan's influence grew, and my own achievements were increasingly overshadowed by her ability to monetize my creative output. The stealing escalated when Megan announced her engagement and began planning what she described as a dream wedding that would be extensively documented for her social media platforms. She hired a professional wedding photographer, videographer, and social media manager to capture every detail of an event that was designed as much for content creation as for celebrating her marriage. "I want everything to be perfect and original," Megan told me during one of her studio visits while planning the wedding. "I don't want anything that looks like it came from a typical bridal salon. I want pieces that are unique and special, that show my personal style." She was speaking as though she intended to commission custom work from me, but her tone suggested expectation rather than request. When I offered to design something specifically for her wedding, Megan seemed interested, but unwilling to commit to the timeline and investment that custom bridal work requires. "Can't you just let me borrow something that's already made?" she asked. "I know you have beautiful pieces in your studio that would be perfect for my wedding." The suggestion that I should provide finished wedding gowns for her to borrow revealed how fundamentally Megan misunderstood both the nature of custom design work and the personal significance of bridal fashion. Wedding dresses aren't interchangeable inventory. They're deeply personal creations that represent specific relationships, aesthetic visions, and emotional investments. But the conversation that would ultimately lead to the theft occurred when Megan saw my personal wedding dress during a studio visit 2 months before her ceremony. I had been making final adjustments to the beadwork when she arrived, and the dress was displayed on my custom dress form under professional lighting that highlighted every detail of the intricate construction. "Oh my God, Isabella," Megan breathed, circling the dress form and examining every detail. "This is absolutely stunning. The beadwork is incredible, and the way the lace flows into the train is like something from a fairy tale. This is exactly the kind of dress I want for my wedding." I explained that the dress was my personal wedding gown, created specifically for my own ceremony, and incorporating design elements that had personal meaning for David and me. I offered again to create something similar but unique for her wedding, working with her to develop a design that would reflect her own relationship and aesthetic preferences. "But I love this exact dress," Megan said, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she used when she wanted something she couldn't have. "Couldn't I just borrow it for my wedding? We're the same size, and it would be perfect for my venue and theme. You're not getting married for another year. Surely you could let me use it for one day." The request to borrow my personal wedding dress for her ceremony was so inappropriate that I initially thought she was joking. When I realized she was serious, I explained that the dress was irreplaceable, that it contained personal elements specific to my relationship, and that borrowing someone else's wedding dress, especially from a family member, would be emotionally complicated for everyone involved. "You're being selfish," Megan said, her tone shifting from pleading to accusatory. "It's just a dress, and you could make another one. I need something spectacular for my wedding, and this dress would be perfect. Why can't you share something beautiful with your sister?" The characterization of my refusal as selfishness was typical of how Megan reframed boundaries around my work as personal failings rather than professional necessities. But this time, the stakes were higher than borrowed accessories or copied techniques. This was my personal wedding dress, the physical embodiment of my dreams for my own marriage. Our mother's response when Megan complained about my refusal was entirely predictable and completely devastating. The confrontation that would expose years of family dysfunction around creative theft occurred on the morning of Megan's wedding, when I arrived at the venue hoping to speak privately with my sister about returning my stolen dress, and found instead that the entire wedding party was complicit in covering up the theft. I had spent a sleepless night after discovering the missing dress, frantically searching my apartment and studio to make sure I hadn't simply misplaced it somewhere. By dawn, I had checked every closet, storage area, and garment bag in my possession, confirming that the dress had been deliberately taken from the locked closet where I kept my most precious pieces. The security footage from my building had provided undeniable evidence of the theft. The timestamp showed Megan entering my apartment building at 1:47 a.m., using the key I had given her for emergencies, proceeding directly to my unit, and leaving 43 minutes later carrying a large garment bag that clearly contained a voluminous gown. But watching the footage had been emotionally devastating in ways that went beyond simple theft. Megan had moved through my apartment with obvious familiarity, knowing exactly where to find the dress and how to remove it without triggering the alarm system. She had violated not just my property, but my trust, using emergency access to commit a premeditated crime against her own sister. When I arrived at the wedding venue, I was emotionally prepared for a difficult conversation, but hopeful that confronting Megan privately before the ceremony might resolve the situation without creating a public scene. I genuinely believed that once she understood how devastating the theft was, she would return the dress and we could figure out an alternative solution for her wedding day. "Megan," I said when I found her in the bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids who were helping with final preparations, "we need to talk privately about something urgent." The wedding party looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances that suggested they knew exactly what I wanted to discuss. "Isabella, not now," Megan said without looking up from her phone, where she was reviewing the photography timeline with her social media manager. "I'm getting married in 2 hours and I don't have time for whatever drama you want to create. Can't it wait until after the honeymoon?" The dismissive tone and the characterization of theft as drama were infuriating, but I tried to remain calm and focus on resolving the situation rather than escalating it. "Megan, you took my wedding dress from my apartment. I have security footage of you entering my building at 2 a.m. and leaving with my dress. I need you to return it immediately." The bridal suite fell silent as bridesmaids stopped their preparations and stared at us, clearly shocked by the accusation but not surprised by the content. Their expressions suggested they had known about the theft, but hadn't expected me to confront Megan directly about it. "I don't know what you're talking about," Megan said, finally looking up from her phone with an expression of practiced innocence. "I haven't taken anything from your apartment. Maybe you misplaced your dress, or maybe someone else took it. Don't try to blame me for your own carelessness." The denial was so blatant and obviously false that it took my breath away. I pulled out my phone and showed her the security footage, playing the timestamp that clearly showed her entering my building and leaving with the garment bag. "This is you, Megan," I said, pointing to the screen. "This is you at 1:47 a.m. using my spare key to enter my apartment and steal my wedding dress. The footage is timestamped and shows your face clearly. There's no point in denying what we can both see on video. Have you ever confronted someone with undeniable evidence of their wrongdoing and watched them double down on lies rather than acknowledge reality?" That's exactly what happened as Megan looked at footage of herself committing theft and continued to deny that she had done anything wrong. "That could be anyone," Megan said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The video quality isn't clear enough to prove anything, and just because someone who looks like me was in your building doesn't mean they took your dress. You're being paranoid and accusatory on my wedding day." The gaslighting was so extreme that I wondered if Megan had convinced herself that theft was acceptable when it served her needs, or if she simply believed that family loyalty should protect her from consequences regardless of what she had done. "Megan, I know you took my dress," I said, my voice rising with frustration. "The security footage shows you taking it, my dress is missing, and you're about to wear it at your wedding. Just admit what you did and give me back my dress." What happened next would reveal not just Megan's character, but the extent to which our entire family was willing to enable and protect her theft. "Fine," Megan said, her voice shifting from denial to open hostility. "Yes, I took your precious dress. And you know what? I'm going to wear it at my wedding, and I'm going to look absolutely stunning in it. Cry all you want. I look better in it than you ever would." The admission of theft, combined with the cruel comparison, was so shocking that several bridesmaids gasped audibly. But what was even more devastating was what happened when our mother entered the bridal suite and immediately took Megan's side despite having just heard her admit to stealing my wedding dress. "Isabella, what are you doing?" Carol demanded, looking at me with obvious disapproval. "Why are you in here upsetting your sister on her wedding day? Can't whatever this is about wait until after the ceremony?" "Mom, Megan stole my wedding dress," I said, pointing to my phone where the security footage was still playing. "She broke into my apartment in the middle of the night and took the dress I spent 6 months creating for my own wedding. She just admitted it in front of everyone." Carol looked at the phone briefly, then back at me with an expression of irritation rather than shock or concern. Isabella, stop being so dramatic. It's just a dress, and Megan needs something beautiful for her wedding day. You can make another one. The casual dismissal of the theft as unimportant and the suggestion that I should simply create another irreplaceable masterpiece was so infuriating that I could barely form words to respond. It's not just a dress, Mom, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. It's my personal wedding dress that I created for my own ceremony. It has personal elements specific to my relationship with David. It contains beadwork using grandmother's pearls and embroidery that tells our story. It's irreplaceable. Well, now it's telling Megan's story, Carol said with finality. She's wearing it today, and you need to stop trying to ruin her wedding with your selfishness. Be happy for your sister and stop making this about you. The reframing of theft as sharing and my objection to it as selfishness was the culmination of years of family dynamics that prioritized Megan's wants over my rights. But watching it happen in real time, with my stolen dress hanging in the corner of the bridal suite while my mother demanded that I celebrate the theft, was more devastating than I had ever imagined possible. Isabella, you need to leave, Megan said, her voice calm and satisfied now that our mother had supported her position. This is my wedding day, and I'm not going to let you ruin it with your jealousy and drama. Go home and sulk if you want, but don't try to destroy my happiness because you're bitter about me looking better in your dress than you would. The dismissal was delivered in front of the entire wedding party, who watched in uncomfortable silence as I was humiliated for objecting to my own property being stolen. Not one of them spoke up to support me or acknowledge that what they were witnessing was fundamentally wrong. The dress looks absolutely perfect on Megan, one of the bridesmaids said, clearly trying to diffuse the tension but actually making it worse. She's going to look like a princess walking down the aisle. You should be proud that your design is part of such a beautiful wedding. The suggestion that I should be proud to see my stolen creation worn by someone else was the final insult. My family and their friends were asking me to celebrate my own victimization while treating my grief over the theft as evidence of poor character. As I was escorted from the bridal suite, I realized that traditional family conflict resolution would never work in this situation. Megan felt entitled to my work. Our mother supported that entitlement, and the entire wedding party was willing to be complicit in theft rather than confront uncomfortable truth. The time had come for consequences that couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or reframed as family drama. My stolen dress was about to become evidence in a very public revelation that would expose not just the theft, but the entire system of family enabling that had made it possible. The humiliation of being thrown out of the bridal suite for objecting to my own dress being stolen crystallized my understanding that this situation required a response that couldn't be minimized, dismissed, or swept under the family rug. Traditional confrontation had failed because my family was committed to protecting Megan's wedding narrative, even when it was built on theft and exploitation. Sitting in my car in the venue parking lot, I made the decision that would change our family dynamics forever. Instead of leaving in defeat or trying to find alternative ways to address the theft privately, I was going to gather undeniable evidence that would make public denial impossible and force everyone involved to confront the reality of what they were supporting. The first step was documenting the complete chain of evidence that proved the dress belonged to me and had been stolen by Megan. I had brought my laptop to the venue intending to show Megan the security footage privately, but now I was going to prepare a comprehensive presentation that would be impossible to dismiss or ignore. I spent the next hour in my car organizing months of documentation that told the complete story of the dress's creation. I had photos from every stage of the design process, from initial sketches to fabric selection to construction progress. I had receipts for every material used, including the vintage French lace and hand-selected pearls that made the dress uniquely mine. The design sketches were particularly compelling because they included detailed notes about the personal symbolism I had incorporated into each element. The forget-me-not embroidery that matched David's eyes, the hidden initials worked into the train, the specific placement of grandmother's pearls. Every detail was documented with explanations of its personal significance. but the most damning evidence was the security footage from my apartment building, which I had already downloaded and enhanced to show Megan's face clearly as she entered and exited with the stolen dress. The timestamp made it impossible to claim the theft had occurred innocently or accidentally. This was premeditated breaking and entering committed in the middle of the night. I also had GPS tracking data from my phone that showed Megan had been at my apartment building during the exact window when the theft occurred, contradicting any potential alibi she might try to create. The digital trail was comprehensive and undeniable, painting a clear picture of calculated theft rather than family borrowing. As I organized the evidence, I realized that this wasn't just about recovering my dress. It was about establishing boundaries that would prevent future theft and exploitation. Megan had been taking my creative work for years because there had never been real consequences for her actions. Our family's pattern of protecting her from accountability had enabled increasingly serious violations of my property and dignity. Have you ever reached the point where you realized that protecting someone from consequences was actually enabling them to become worse rather than better? That's exactly what I understood about my family's relationship with Megan's theft and appropriation of my work. The evidence I was compiling would serve multiple purposes: recovering my dress, exposing the theft publicly, establishing legal consequences for breaking and entering, and creating a paper trail that would prevent future appropriation of my creative work. But most importantly, it would force my family to choose between continuing to enable Megan's behavior and acknowledging the reality of what she had done. I also began documenting the broader pattern of theft and appropriation that had led to this moment. Screenshots of Megan's social media posts featuring my designs without credit, testimonials from clients who had mentioned seeing similar work on her platforms, financial estimates of the business opportunities I had lost due to her theft of my creative credibility. The pattern was extensive and damaging, representing years of systematic exploitation that had been normalized through family pressure and emotional manipulation. Megan hadn't just stolen a dress. She had been stealing my professional identity and creative output while my family celebrated her success and criticized my objections to the theft. But the most important decision I made was to present this evidence publicly rather than attempting another private confrontation. Megan had already demonstrated that she was willing to lie, even when faced with video evidence of her theft. Our mother had shown that she was committed to protecting Megan, regardless of what she had done. The wedding party had proven they were willing to be complicit in covering up theft rather than standing up for what was right. Private confrontation had failed because it allowed everyone involved to maintain their preferred narrative while silencing the victim. Public exposure would force accountability, because it would be impossible to deny evidence that was being presented to dozens of witnesses simultaneously. I checked the timing of the wedding ceremony and realized that the perfect moment for revelation would be immediately after the vows, when Megan would be feeling most triumphant about getting away with the theft, and the audience would be most focused on celebrating what they believed was a legitimate wedding celebration. The irony of exposing theft at the moment of greatest supposed happiness was poetic justice that felt appropriate for someone who had stolen my dreams and was using them to create content for her own celebration. As guests began arriving for the ceremony, I positioned myself strategically in the venue where I would have clear sightlines to the altar and easy access to the sound system if needed. I loaded the evidence presentation onto my phone and prepared to reveal the truth about the stolen dress at the moment when denial would be most difficult and consequences most immediate. The bride who had stolen my wedding dress and the family who had protected her theft were about to learn that some violations are too profound to be covered up by demands for silence and family loyalty. The wedding ceremony proceeded exactly as Megan had planned, with professional photographers and videographers capturing every moment for the social media content that would showcase her perfect wedding to her hundreds of thousands of followers. But as I watched my stolen dress glide down the aisle, I felt none of the heartbreak I had anticipated. Instead, I felt the calm determination that comes from knowing justice is about to be served. Megan looked radiant in my dress, and I had to admit that she carried herself beautifully as she approached the altar. The beadwork caught the light exactly as I had designed it to. The French lace flowed with the graceful movement I had spent months perfecting, and the overall effect was everything I had envisioned when I created the gown. But watching someone else wear my dreams while my family celebrated the theft only strengthened my resolve to expose what was really happening. Every compliment about the dress, every photo taken of Megan wearing my stolen creation, every moment of the ceremony that was being documented for her social media platforms, all of it was evidence of theft being celebrated as triumph. The ceremony itself was beautiful and professionally orchestrated, with readings that Megan had chosen to reflect her relationship with her fiancé Jake, music that had personal significance to their courtship, and vows that spoke to their shared dreams for the future. Under different circumstances, I would have been genuinely happy for my sister as she married someone who obviously loved her deeply. But it was impossible to focus on the legitimate celebration when it was built around a stolen centerpiece that represented months of my creative work and personal dreams. Every time the officiant mentioned the beauty of the bride or the significance of the moment, I thought about how different this ceremony would have looked if Megan had been wearing a dress she had actually chosen and paid for, rather than one she had stolen from her sister. As the ceremony progressed through traditional elements, the processional, readings, exchange of rings, and personal vows, I noticed that several guests were glancing in my direction with expressions that suggested they knew something was wrong, but weren't sure what it was. My absence from the wedding party was apparently noticeable to relatives who knew I should have been involved in my sister's celebration. The moment of truth came as the officiant pronounced Megan and Jake married and invited them to seal their vows with a kiss. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers as the newlyweds embraced, and photographers moved into position to capture the magical moment when bride and groom would walk back down the aisle as a married couple. But as the applause died down and the officiant said, "Amen," to conclude the ceremony, I stood up slowly and held my phone high so that everyone in the venue could see the screen. "Before we move to the reception," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the venue's sound system, "I think everyone should know the truth about the dress the bride is wearing." The sudden shift from celebration to confrontation was so unexpected that the entire congregation fell silent, turning to look at me with confusion and growing concern. Megan's face went white as she realized what was about to happen, but it was too late to stop the revelation. "The dress Megan is wearing was stolen from my apartment 3 days ago," I continued, holding up my phone to show the security footage. "This video shows her using my spare key to break into my building at 1:47 a.m. and leave with the wedding dress I spent 6 months creating for my own ceremony." The congregation watched in stunned silence as the timestamp clearly showed Megan entering my apartment building in the middle of the night and leaving with a large garment bag that obviously contained a wedding dress. Have you ever watched a room full of people realize simultaneously that they've been witnessing a celebration built on theft? That's exactly what happened as the security footage played, and everyone understood that the beautiful bride they had been admiring was wearing a stolen dress that belonged to her sister. "This is the design sketch from 8 months ago," I continued, swiping to show the detailed drawings that proved the dress was my original creation. "These are the receipts for the French lace, the vintage pearls, and the custom beadwork. These are progress photos from every stage of construction, showing the dress being created in my studio over 6 months. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, painting a clear picture of creative ownership, followed by calculated theft. Every guest could see that the dress was my creation and that Megan had stolen it, rather than commissioning or purchasing her own gown. The beadwork includes pearls that belonged to our grandmother," I said, zooming in on specific details that were visible on the dress Megan was wearing. "The embroidery includes forget-me-nots that match my fiancé's eyes and our initials hidden in the train. Every element of this dress was designed specifically for my wedding to David, not for Megan's wedding to Jake." The personal details were particularly damning because they proved that the dress wasn't just stolen property. It was stolen property with intimate significance that belonged to someone else's relationship and future ceremony. The revelation was having exactly the impact I had hoped for, exposing the theft in a way that made denial impossible and forced everyone present to confront the reality of what they had been celebrating. The impact of my revelation rippled through the wedding venue like an earthquake, fundamentally altering the atmosphere from celebration to crisis as guests processed the evidence of theft they were witnessing in real time. The professional photographers and videographers who had been capturing Megan's perfect wedding moments were now inadvertently documenting the exposure of her crime. Megan stood frozen at the altar in my stolen dress, her face cycling through emotions as she realized that her theft had been exposed in the most public way possible. The confident bride who had dismissed my objections hours earlier was now facing undeniable evidence of her crime being presented to everyone she had invited to celebrate her special day. "Isabella, stop this immediately!" our mother shouted from her seat in the front row, jumping up and trying to approach me. "You're ruining your sister's wedding with these horrible accusations. Put that phone away and stop making a scene." But Carol's attempts to silence me were falling flat, because the evidence I was presenting spoke for itself. The security footage, design sketches, receipts, and progress photos created an undeniable chain of proof that the dress belonged to me and had been stolen by Megan. "These aren't accusations, Mom," I said, continuing to display the evidence on my phone. "This is documented proof of breaking and entering, theft, and fraud. Megan committed multiple felonies to steal my wedding dress, and now she's wearing the evidence of her crimes while expecting everyone to celebrate her happiness." Jake, Megan's new husband, was staring at his bride with obvious shock and growing anger as he began to understand that his wedding was built around stolen property. "Megan," he said quietly, "is this true? Did you really steal Isabella's dress?" The question from her own husband, asked in front of their entire wedding party and congregation, was clearly devastating for Megan. She had expected to get away with the theft and enjoy her wedding without consequences, but now she was being forced to account for her actions in the most public forum possible. "It's not stealing when it's family," Megan said desperately, her voice rising with panic. "Isabella has lots of dresses, and she wasn't using this one right now. I needed something beautiful for my wedding, and she was being selfish by not sharing. Sisters should help each other." The attempt to reframe theft as sharing was so obviously inadequate that several guests were shaking their heads in disbelief. Megan's defense was actually making her crime seem worse by revealing her sense of entitlement to other people's property. "Megan," Jake said, his voice filled with disappointment and embarrassment, "you can't just take someone else's wedding dress. That's not sharing. That's stealing. And breaking into her apartment in the middle of the night? How could you think that was acceptable?" The conversation between bride and groom was being overheard by everyone in the venue, turning their private marital crisis into public entertainment. But more importantly, it was forcing everyone present to choose sides between enabling theft and supporting property rights. "The dress has GPS tracking embedded in the beadwork," I announced, pulling up another screen on my phone. "This data shows the exact location of the dress from the time it was completed in my studio until now. You can see it leaving my apartment at 2:23 a.m. on Tuesday night and arriving at this venue this morning." Have you ever watched technology expose a lie so completely that the perpetrator had no possible response? That's exactly what happened as the GPS data provided minute-by-minute tracking of my stolen dress from my apartment to Megan's wedding venue. The tracking data was particularly damning because it contradicted any potential claim that the dress had been borrowed with permission or taken accidentally. The midnight timing and direct route to the wedding venue proved that this was premeditated theft specifically intended to provide Megan with a wedding dress she hadn't paid for. "I'm calling the police," I announced, pulling out my phone to dial 911. "This is documented theft, breaking and entering, and fraud. Megan has committed multiple felonies, and I'm pressing charges." The threat of legal consequences finally broke through the family's attempts to minimize and normalize the theft. Carol looked panicked as she realized that her protection of Megan might not be sufficient to prevent criminal charges. "Isabella, you can't call the police at your sister's wedding," Carol pleaded. "Think about the family. Think about the photos and the guests. This will ruin everything. Megan ruined everything when she stole my wedding dress," I replied. "I'm not going to protect her from consequences just because she chose to commit crimes on her wedding day. She made this choice, and now she gets to live with the results." The wedding guests were beginning to pull out their own phones to record the confrontation, realizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary that would likely become viral content. Megan's social media wedding was turning into a public relations disaster that would follow her indefinitely. But the most satisfying moment came when several wedding guests began openly discussing the theft among themselves, no longer pretending that what they were witnessing was acceptable family drama rather than documented criminal behavior. "I can't believe she stole her sister's wedding dress," one guest whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "and wore it to her own wedding like nothing happened. That's psychotic." The shift in public opinion was exactly what I had hoped for. Megan's theft was being recognized as criminal behavior rather than family conflict, and her attempts to justify it were being seen as evidence of deeper character problems rather than reasonable explanations. As police sirens became audible in the distance, Megan finally began to understand that her actions were going to have real consequences that couldn't be minimized, dismissed, or protected by family loyalty. The arrival of police officers at the wedding venue marked the point where Megan's theft transitioned from family drama to criminal investigation, with my stolen dress serving as evidence in what would become a very public legal case. The contrast between the celebration Megan had planned and the reality she was now facing could not have been more stark or more satisfying. "Officers," I said when the police entered the venue, "I'd like to report theft, breaking and entering, and fraud. I have video evidence of the suspect using my spare key to enter my apartment and steal the wedding dress she's currently wearing." The police took the situation seriously from the moment they saw the comprehensive evidence I had compiled. The security footage was clear and time-stamped. The GPS tracking data provided minute-by-minute documentation of the dress's movement, and the design documentation proved beyond doubt that I was the rightful owner of the stolen property. "Ma'am," one of the officers said to Megan, "we're going to need you to come with us to answer some questions about these theft allegations. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to an attorney." The reading of Miranda rights at a wedding reception was surreal and devastating for everyone involved. Guests were recording the arrest on their phones, creating a permanent digital record of Megan's humiliation that would contradict her carefully curated social media image. "You can't arrest me at my own wedding," Megan protested, but her voice lacked conviction as she realized that her actions had consequences that even family protection couldn't prevent. "This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life. You made it the happiest day of your life by stealing someone else's property," the officer replied matter-of-factly. "Now you get to explain to a judge why you thought that was acceptable." Jake was standing beside his new wife, looking absolutely devastated, as he realized that their marriage was beginning with criminal charges and public humiliation. "Megan, how could you do this?" he asked. "How could you steal from your own sister and then lie about it?" The wedding that was supposed to launch Megan's married life was instead exposing character flaws that her husband was seeing clearly for the first time. Her sense of entitlement, her willingness to commit crimes for personal gain, her ability to lie even when faced with evidence, all of it was being revealed in the most public way possible. "The dress will need to be removed as evidence," the officer informed Megan. "You'll need to change into something else before we transport you to the station." The requirement that Megan remove my stolen dress in front of her wedding guests was the ultimate humiliation. She would have to strip off the centerpiece of her wedding celebration and hand it over to police as evidence of her crimes. "I'm not taking off this dress," Megan said desperately. "It's my wedding day, and I'm not changing clothes because my sister is having a jealous breakdown." "Ma'am, this is evidence in a felony investigation," the officer replied firmly. "You can remove it voluntarily, or we can remove it after we arrest you. Those are your options." Have you ever watched someone's denial finally collapse when faced with unavoidable consequences? That's exactly what happened as Megan realized that her theft was being treated as the serious crime it was, regardless of her attempts to minimize it as family conflict. As Megan was escorted to a private room to change out of my stolen dress, guests began leaving the venue in shocked silence. The wedding reception that was supposed to celebrate the beginning of a marriage had instead become the scene of a criminal arrest that would likely end it. "Isabella," Carol approached me with tears in her eyes, "how could you do this to your sister? How could you have her arrested at her own wedding?" "I didn't do anything to Megan," I replied. "She did this to herself when she chose to commit crimes. I just refused to pretend it didn't happen." The distinction between causing consequences and revealing them was lost on our mother, who was still trying to protect Megan from accountability, even as she was being arrested for documented felonies. "The family will never forgive you for this," Carol said, her voice filled with anger and disappointment. "You've destroyed your sister's marriage and humiliated our entire family in public." "The family enabled Megan's theft for years," I responded. "You celebrated her appropriation of my work and criticized me for objecting to it. Now you get to see what happens when theft is treated as the crime it actually is, instead of being protected as family sharing." The conversation with my mother was the final revelation of how deeply our family dysfunction ran. Even faced with video evidence of breaking and entering, even watching Megan be arrested for documented felonies, Carol was still more concerned with protecting the perpetrator than supporting the victim. But as I watched my stolen dress being placed into police evidence bags, I felt a sense of closure and justice that had been absent from my life for years. Megan's theft had finally faced real consequences. Her pattern of appropriation had been exposed publicly, and her ability to continue stealing my work had been legally eliminated. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate Megan's triumph had instead marked the end of her ability to exploit my creativity and the beginning of legal accountability for her crimes. 6 months after Megan's arrest at her own wedding, the legal and personal consequences of her theft had fundamentally transformed our family dynamics and established precedents that would protect my creative work indefinitely. The criminal case had proceeded exactly as I had hoped, with the overwhelming evidence making denial impossible and conviction inevitable. Megan had pled guilty to charges of theft, breaking and entering, and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence that included 18 months of probation, community service, and full restitution for the value of my stolen dress. The guilty plea had been accompanied by a public apology that was required as part of her sentencing, formally acknowledging her crimes and their impact on my business and personal life. "I want to publicly apologize to my sister Isabella for stealing her wedding dress and violating her trust," Megan had read in court, her voice barely audible as she faced the consequences of her actions. "My behavior was criminal and inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for the pain and damage I caused through my theft and lies." The court-ordered apology had been covered by local media, creating a public record of Megan's crimes that would follow her indefinitely. Her influencer career had collapsed almost immediately after the wedding arrest, with sponsors dropping her and followers abandoning her content once they learned about the theft. But the most significant consequence was the restraining order I had obtained that legally prohibited Megan from entering my home, studio, or business premises without permission. The order also required her to return any of my designs, sketches, or creative materials in her possession, and prohibited her from using my work in any future content creation. "Isabella," the judge had said when granting the restraining order, "you have the right to protect your creative work from theft and appropriation. No one, regardless of family relationship, has the right to take your property or profit from your creative labor without permission." The legal validation of my right to protect my work from family theft had been incredibly meaningful, establishing precedents that would prevent future appropriation and give me legal recourse if boundaries were violated again. My relationship with our mother had been more complicated to resolve. Carol had initially maintained her position that I had overreacted to family borrowing and had damaged our relationships by involving law enforcement in what she considered private family matters. "You could have handled this privately," Carol had argued during one of our few conversations after Megan's conviction. "Calling the police at her wedding was cruel and vindictive. You got your dress back. Wasn't that enough?" "Getting the dress back wasn't enough," I had replied. Megan needed to face real consequences for theft, or she would have continued stealing from me indefinitely. And the family needed to understand that theft is theft, regardless of who commits it. The conversation had helped Carol begin to understand that her protection of Megan's theft had been enabling criminal behavior rather than preserving family harmony. But the process of rebuilding our relationship required her to acknowledge years of favoritism and poor judgment that she was reluctant to confront. Eventually, Carol had agreed to attend family counseling sessions focused on understanding healthy boundaries around creative work and intellectual property. The sessions had been educational for both of us, helping her understand why her dismissal of my objections to theft had been so damaging and helping me articulate my needs for respect and protection going forward. I realize now that I treated your creative work as something that belonged to the whole family rather than recognizing it as your professional property, Carol had said during one of our therapy sessions. I thought sharing was more important than ownership, but I didn't understand that forced sharing is actually theft. Have you ever watched someone finally understand a concept that had been obvious to you for years? That's exactly what happened as Carol began to grasp the difference between voluntary sharing and involuntary appropriation, between family generosity and family exploitation. My business had actually benefited significantly from the publicity surrounding Megan's arrest and conviction. The story of a fashion designer whose sister stole her wedding dress had resonated with creative professionals who had experienced similar family appropriation of their work, leading to new clients who specifically sought out designers who understood intellectual property protection. I heard about what happened with your sister, one new client had told me during our consultation, and I want to work with someone who takes creative ownership seriously. I've had family members try to copy my ideas before, and I need a designer who understands that respect for creative work starts with respecting the creator. The recognition from other creative professionals had been more meaningful than financial compensation, validating my decision to pursue legal consequences rather than accepting family pressure to minimize the theft. My relationship with David had also been strengthened by the entire experience. He had supported my decision to press charges and had been present at every court hearing, demonstrating his commitment to protecting our relationship and future together. I'm proud of you for standing up to your family, David had told me after Megan's sentencing. It took courage to expose the theft publicly and follow through with legal consequences. You protected not just your dress, but your integrity and our future together. The support from my fiancé had been crucial during a period when much of my family was criticizing my decisions and suggesting that I should have prioritized family harmony over justice and accountability. As for my stolen wedding dress, it had been returned to me after serving as evidence in Megan's criminal trial. But the experience of seeing it worn by someone else at their wedding had changed my relationship with the garment, and I ultimately decided to preserve it as a museum piece rather than wearing it at my own ceremony. I want to create something new for our wedding, I had told David when explaining my decision. Something that represents our future together, rather than a traumatic experience with my family. The stolen dress will always be beautiful, but it's not what I want to wear when we make our vows to each other. The decision to design a new wedding dress had been liberating, allowing me to channel my creative energy into something positive rather than dwelling on the violation and theft I had experienced. 1 year after Megan's wedding arrest, I walked down the aisle wearing a completely new creation that represented my growth, resilience, and commitment to protecting my creative work. The ceremony was attended by people who respected my achievements and supported my decisions, rather than people who felt entitled to my creative output or critical of my boundaries. I promise to support your creative work and protect your artistic integrity, David had said during his wedding vows, acknowledging the importance of intellectual property respect in our relationship. I promise to celebrate your achievements rather than taking them for granted, and to stand with you when others try to exploit your generosity. The vows had been particularly meaningful because they addressed the specific challenges I had faced with family appropriation, while establishing clear expectations for mutual respect and protection going forward. As I reflected on the journey from theft to justice to healing, I realized that my decision to expose Megan's crimes publicly had been necessary not just for recovering my property, but for establishing the principle that creative work deserves protection regardless of family relationships. The sister who had felt entitled to steal my wedding dress had learned that theft has consequences that can't be minimized by family loyalty or emotional manipulation. The mother who had protected theft as family sharing had learned to respect intellectual property rights and creative boundaries. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when it creates conflict and consequences. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who feel entitled to your creative work or professional achievements, please know that you have the right to protect what you've created. Theft is theft regardless of who commits it. And family relationships don't excuse criminal behavior or justify exploitation. Setting boundaries around your creative work isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining both your artistic integrity and your financial security. Sometimes the people who claim they deserve access to your work are the ones who respect it least, and protecting your creativity may require legal action that others will criticize as excessive or vindictive. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had family members steal or appropriate your creative work? How did you handle situations where relatives felt entitled to profit from your professional skills without compensation or credit? Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar creative theft and family exploitation. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that your creative work deserves protection and respect, even from people who share your DNA. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.